Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out your entire government is, well, actually just a bankrupt foreign corporation. Sounds wild, right? Welcome to this explainer. I'm really thrilled to have you here today. We are going to be unpacking a highly intricate, fascinating alternative legal theory that's been gaining a lot of traction online, driven by a movement calling themselves the United Civilians of Sovereign Australia. Through their detailed lectures and whiteboard breakdowns, they've mapped out a completely parallel view of Australian history, law, and constitutional authority. Our goal today is to impartially examine the source material, figure out exactly what this movement believes, how they justify it, and what actions they are urging their followers to take.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our agenda today covers the core claim, a timeline of acts, the whole subject versus citizen debate, the tale of two flags, and finally, the civilian solution.
Section 1. The core claim, a foreign administration.
To really wrap our heads around this movement, we've got to start with their foundational belief about the government. And to capture their intense sense of urgency, the source uses a really visceral analogy. He says, "I thought I was in a warm spa. You weren't. It's a boiling frog, and by the time you work it out, you can barely get out of it." It perfectly illustrates the movement's core idea that the public hasn't been conquered by explicit force, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, tricked out of their inherent rights over decades of subtle legal changes.
So what exactly is the trap? According to this theory, the modern Australian government doesn't operate as a true constitutional parliament at all. Instead, the speaker asserts it's a bankrupt foreign corporate administration. Essentially, they argue the government functions as a corporate entity administering foreign debt, and because it's bankrupt, it acts kind of like a debt collector. That's why, according to the source, it relies totally on coercion, what they describe as the threat of fines, gunpoint, jail, or taking your assets, just to enforce participation in a system people unknowingly consented to.
Section 2. A timeline of acts. The usurpation of power.
Let's trace the timeline and see how this builds. How do they claim this takeover actually happened? Well, the movement relies on a very specific historical timeline, arguing that true sovereignty was progressively legislated away. It kicks off in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles, which the speaker claims was the moment Australia was internationally granted real independence. But instead of claiming it, they argue a series of acts eroded that power. First, the 1933 Westminster Act shifted authority away from the people. Then, the 1948 Citizenship Act supposedly turned constitutional subjects into citizens, which is a huge distinction we'll get to in a sec. Next up, the 1973 Royal Style and Titles Act created what they call a fictitious corporate Queen of Australia, replacing the real constitutional crown. Finally, the 1986 Australia Act allegedly severed the last legal pathways for people to petition the original crown, basically sealing the deal on the corporate takeover.
Section 3. The vocabulary of sovereignty, subject versus citizen.
Now, language is absolutely crucial here. A major pillar of this theory is a deep fixation on redefining common legal vocabulary. They argue words are the literal mechanism used to strip your power. Look at the stark contrast they draw between a subject and a citizen. In their worldview, a subject actually sits legally above the parliament, holding inherent power and land rights. But becoming a citizen, the speaker views that as a willing demotion. Drawing heavily on maritime law, they define a citizen as someone loyal to a corporate republic, essentially a shipmate on an administrative vessel who only has privileges, not real rights. If you call yourself a citizen, they argue you've willingly handed your constitutional power to the captain of that corporate ship.
Knowing all this, you might naturally assume they proudly go by the label sovereign citizen, right? Surprisingly, no way. They vehemently reject it. The speaker defines sovereign citizen as a total oxymoron. They argue it's completely contradictory to claim you're inherently sovereign while actively participating in the corporate system as a citizen. In fact, they firmly believe that using this flawed term is exactly why these folks are consistently mocked and easily defeated in modern courts.
Section 4. The tale of two flags. Red versus blue.
Beyond vocabulary, there is an intense focus on visual symbolism. To this movement, national flags aren't just patriotic decorations. They're strict markers of entirely different legal jurisdictions. According to the source, the red ensign is the true 1953 civilian flag. It represents the land, the people, and historical warriors like the Anzacs. Conversely, the speaker argues the standard blue ensign is strictly a government, corporate flag. They assert that waving the blue flag is a legal signal that you comply with a foreign occupying power. This isn't just theory, this is literally why you might see the red ensign flying at certain protests. It's a physical declaration of this exact legal stance.
Section 5. The civilian solution. A peaceful remedy.
And this brilliantly illustrates what the movement actually wants people to do about all this perceived deception. It starts with a highly controversial directive. The speaker emphatically states, the moment you vote, you are allowing the occupation to continue of your country. That's actually treason to the Commonwealth claim. In their framework, voting is the ultimate trap. It's legally consenting to corporate control. To them, voting just installs the next corporate administrator, effectively stepping out of the boiling pot and straight into the fire.
So, what's the alternative? If you shouldn't be a citizen or a voter, what are you? The speaker's ultimate remedy is to claim the title of civilian. By identifying strictly as a peaceful civilian inhabiting an occupied land, the movement believes you can completely step outside the domestic corporate legal framework. They argue this status unlocks powerful protections under international treaties like the Hague, Nuremberg, or Geneva Conventions. Under this theory, local authorities and police forces would literally have zero jurisdiction over you.
So to bring it all together, the actionable steps here are super specific. First, absolutely stop voting to physically withdraw your consent. Second, actively reject what they see as the parallel corporate constitution. Third, legally and vocally identify as a peaceful civilian to claim those international protections. And finally, they know they can't do this alone. The speaker emphasizes they need to unite a critical mass of 1 million people under this United Civilians of Sovereign Australia banner. It's a massive, staggering logistical goal, but it really highlights the sheer scale of their ambition to peacefully reclaim their country.
So, what does this all mean? We've just navigated a deeply complex alternative ideology that completely reimagines a nation's history and legal structure. The whole thing rests on the profound belief that language, words like citizen, subject, and civilian, holds the power to either enslave us or liberate us. As you think about all these specific claims, I'll leave you with this question. By radically redefining our legal vocabulary and history, does this movement offer a genuine path to hidden rights, or simply a deeply complex parallel reality? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.